Today, the task force has deliberated carefully and decided to raise the risk assessment to DORSCON Orange.
With this declaration, the first round of panic buying began. But a 9-minute speech by Prime Minister Lee Hsien Loong quelled fears.
We have ample supplies. There's no need to stock up with
and
instant
frantic
noodles.
buying stopped. That was until 10 days ago.
We have breaking news out of Malaysia. Malaysian Prime Minister Muhyiddin Yassin has announced a nationwide lockdown to curb the spread of COVID-19.
Malaysian police have set up more than 500 roadblocks.
Supermarkets were inundated again. This time flying off the shelves, fresh produce.
鸡买不到。
连那些菜都卖到光，鸡蛋也是光啊，才9点而已嘞，这么早就没有。
Escape me, I have no more vegetable or what. So if I don't have it today, my family members nothing to eat.
What she said totally resonates with me. In the last few days, we have been reading about tighter border restrictions and global lockdowns. Like most Singaporeans, I am worried about whether there's going to be enough food for my family of 5. So in this special episode of Talking Point, I want to find out how will these lockdowns affect our food supply. In Singapore, over 90% of the food we eat is imported. Neighbouring Malaysia is one of our biggest exporters of fresh produce. No wonder there is a second wave of panic buying among Singaporeans. Singapore's Prime Minister Lee Hsien Loong was quick to clarify that the lockdown will not affect the supply of goods. And on the first day, it seems that it was business as usual at the causeway, with delivery trucks bearing fresh produce coming into Singapore. But as Malaysia is also enforcing a restricted movement order within the country, urging its citizens to stay home, I wonder if the supply of our fresh produce will be affected further down the line. For some answers, I'm on my way to meet a vegetable importer who gets 40% of its produce from Malaysia. It's 4 days after the lockdown. A truck from Malaysia carrying vegetables has yet to arrive. Finally, half an hour after schedule. Yo-Ming, I heard the trucks were a bit delayed this morning. Why is that so?
Because recently there's this panic buying situation in Singapore. So we have to get our Malaysia vendors to pack a bit more. Yeah, so overnight they try to pack as much as possible and send the vegetable over. So that's why this morning there's a slight delay.
How many percent has your demand surged by?
Around 50 to 70%, I should say.
50 to 70%, that's a lot. The situation is fairly uncertain now. What will happen to our vegetables?
We do have backup sources from Vietnam, Indonesia, Taiwan that can start supplying to us as soon as possible. So maybe what happened is that will be a cost increase because the air freight cost and sea freight cost from this country is actually higher than what we have from Malaysia. Let's say by air freight, it will be around a 50 to 80% increase, depending how far is the region. Sea freight is around 30 to 50%.
So I'm seeing the vegetables in this packing area. I'm very curious. Can you actually stockpile vegetables?
Depending on what type of produce they have a specific shelf life. So maybe between 5 days.
If the supply is affected from Malaysia, is there one vegetable that Singaporeans are going to miss the most?
Tomatoes from Malaysia.
Are you serious?
Yes, because in Singapore, the people are too used to the variety of the tomatoes from Malaysia. That's why tomato is the one that is most likely going to get hit.
Singapore never relies on just one source of food. We get our produce from across the globe. For example, getting vegetables from as far away as Netherlands and France. Pork and poultry from the US and Brazil, and eggs from New Zealand. But as COVID-19 continues to wreak havoc across the world, border restrictions are being tightened almost everywhere. Will the global supply chain be disrupted? Food Services is a food distribution company that supplies to hotels, restaurants and fast food chains. Everything from dried to fresh and frozen food. Most of their supplies come from the US, Europe and some parts of Asia. Right now, are there any challenges to fresh shipments coming in?
There's a bottleneck at the ports, so even if the factories reopen, the ships are not being loaded fast enough because the employees cannot come to work at the port areas. So to give you an example, if every 6 weeks we're supposed to get some frozen vegetables from Europe, now if I place an order in March, the shipments will only come in end of June or early July. So that's twice or even 2.5 times the amount of time required to bring in the quantity of products that we need.
Okay. Do you see that a few months down the road, Singaporeans may not be able to find some of their favourite frozen items?
I'm very sure that Singaporeans will need to maybe choose from another brand perhaps, or eat something else and not be so picky, for example. But the idea really is, even if factories like in China reopens, the ports will have a hard time catching up with the last 2 months worth of orders that they were supposed to replenish anyway.
So a delay is inevitable. It's clear to me now why it's even more important for us to conserve our current stockpile.
Good morning.
Xia Kianpeng is the man at the helm of supermarket giant FairPrice. Over the last few weeks, he's been working round the clock, trying to get Singaporeans to buy only what they need. When I was looking around earlier on, I saw this sign.
This purchase limits.
That's right, the
Yes.
purchase limits. Now, actually, when I look at the purchase limits, it also makes me wonder, is it because there's not enough? That's why you are rationing?
Indeed, that was something that we considered. But actually, when you look at the purchase limits, there are actually a lot. How many bags of rice do you need? So 2 bags of rice per customer. We have set it at levels which are actually more than adequate for any household. Why we are doing it? Number one, we want to make sure that there's no overbuying. Secondly, we also want to prevent people reselling. But the third most important thing is to make sure there's enough for everyone.
What other strategies do you employ to discourage people from panic buying?
Let me talk less. Let me show you.
Oh, okay.
So Diana, as you can see, this is one place where we normally don't put rice here. Where do you find the rice? It's usually at the other corner. But we deliberately put this at a very prominent location. This is the main aisle. When people see, they can say, oh, you have a lot of rice. I think that gives a lot of assurance.
From businesses to politicians, the message is resounding.
I think the key thing is not to panic.
Do not panic buy. We have enough. But are we convinced? I put one of Singapore's most straight-talking ministers in the hot seat. You still sound emotional talking about it now.
Yes.
I just want 1 pack. No, not 1 bag.
Panic buying isn't unique to Singapore. I've been seeing scenes of people frantically sweeping off shelves across the globe.
Not just one.
So, what does it really take to stop these bouts of frenzied purchasing? I'm not here to stock up on essentials, but I am here to meet someone who's made known his frustration towards panic buyers. He's been trying to allay fears, assuring Singaporeans that they won't go hungry. When the Malaysian lockdown was announced, we saw another round of panic buying despite government assurances that we have enough supplies. Why?
That is very natural human behavior. Then the question for all of us is, how do we overcome this fear, which is natural? From my own training and experience, I think there are only two ways which people can overcome their individual fears. One, just like the boys in the army, they know that they need not fear if they are fighting this together, collectively. So there must be a sense that we are not in this alone. The other thing is whenever we fear, and if we can think about the more vulnerable people in society, the people who need a bit more help, then it will help us to overcome the fear.
Whether it's panic buying or the supply crunch, prices may go up. How will the government ensure that prices remain affordable?
First, we must make sure that we have sufficient stockpile so that can tie us through such difficult moments. Two, we must make sure that we have some local production capabilities that we can surge those production if need be. Three, we must continue to diversify our sources, because if the sources of our products are limited, then we will be held ransom, and then the chances of a price surge will be very high. Most importantly, we must make sure that everybody look at this from the collective perspective. If each of us or each of us keep the stuff to ourselves in a very selfish way, then it will certainly jack up the prices. And it will also allow others to charge us more when they see us panicking.
You have said that Singaporeans may have to make some adjustments to our choices. What do you mean by that?
Well, we can use the example of a fresh vegetable. If on that day we didn't have fresh vegetables, we can consider things like frozen or even canned vegetables. Let me show you some.
Oh, okay. So you know exactly where they are?
Yes, I come here very often. So for example, we have some frozen vegetables here. This can include the frozen mushroom or even the mixed veg that we have here. So for my family, when we didn't have fresh greens, we bought some of this so that the children can still have its daily intake of fibers. It gives us a lot of options. It's very difficult for us to stockpile fresh vegetables because they are perishable. But with a stock of frozen vegetables, it allows us to have the depth of resilience that we can for the country.
Even before we were crippled by COVID-19, we already wanted to reduce our huge dependency on food imports. Game plan? To increase our self-production capabilities from 10 to 30% by 2030. But in light of what's going on, should we explore this sooner rather than later? This vertical farm in Lim Chu Kang has been growing vegetables like xiao bai cai and chai sim for the Singapore market since 2012. Sky Greens contributes about 4% of Singapore's locally grown vegetables. While the farm's technology is a real space saver, I wonder, how much more can it produce? Are you able to increase production?
So right now we are producing about 1 ton of vegetables a day. If we ramp up 3 to 4 tons a day, it's possible.
Okay.
From the word go, within a month we can produce that.
What are the key challenges to increasing production?
We need manpower. Right now we are only working with 12 workers to produce this 1 ton. So to produce the other 2 or 3 tons, you need to multiply, you need to have more workers. And it is very difficult to get farm workers in Singapore, right? So we need maybe volunteers.
Besides the manpower shortages, what other challenges are there?
What we lack are the vegetable seeds. So it is important that we always have a stockpile of vegetable seeds.
Do we have that?
I'm not so sure in Singapore, but our farm has. We have a stockpile for 6 months.
Does that mean that the country also needs to have a stockpile of seeds so that we can increase production anytime?
Oh yes, I think that's very important.
Okay. It's a new day, and I am meeting Minister Chun again. Only this time, he's going to put to bed the question on every Singaporean's lips. How prepared are we in this time of crisis? Hello again, Mr. Chun.
Hello.
Thank you. The security officer is right behind us. Okay, I'm ready, sir. Let's go.
Okay, let's go.
Minister Chun has been in the news quite a bit lately. A few weeks ago, his tough talk towards the first wave of panic buyers went viral. Now, with the current situation, I asked if he still feels as angry.
Well, let me share with you why it was such a sad day for us on the 7th of February, and I always remember that date. We have been trying to build a Singapore where everyone is united, to take care of each other and to never forget that we are one people. So it was very sad for us to see that when a crisis happened, that some Singaporeans forgot that we are all in this together. And it's almost like every man for himself, tearing each other apart. And that was very sad.
You still sound emotional talking about it now.
Yes, because I think many Singaporeans don't realize how hard we work to bring in all the food items and the essential items that we really need. And you know, day in, day out, fellow Singaporeans who are fan out across the entire globe to try to secure those supplies for us. It's a very tough job, especially now, where supply lines are being disrupted, some supply lines are being cut. They have to use their ingenuity, creativity, and most importantly, they must be very tenacious in going out to secure those supplies for us.
Do you regret the comments?
Let me give you a bit of context. You see, our entire life work is to make sure that this shiny red dot of ours continue to shine. It hurts us a lot, individually and collectively, when we don't do as well as we can be and we should be. And the thing that always worries me is, how do we eke out a living going forward beyond this crisis? Will we emerge weaker, whereby people lose faith in Singapore? If that is the case, then there's a lot of damage done.
One way to mitigate our fear of food shortage is to show people just how much reserves we have.
So these are some of the fresh fruits and juices.
I've discovered that in the event of prolonged lockdowns across the globe, we can expect some disruption to our supply chains. Today, Minister Chun is bringing me into a highly secured area. This 180,000 square foot warehouse holds one of the biggest stockpiles of fresh foods in the country. To what extent did the recent round of panic buying put a dent to the national stockpile?
Not much at all, because our national stockpile is quite resilient. Even in the recent run on the supermarket, I think what people may not fully understand is that actually we have all the things in Singapore, but obviously we don't put all the stocks forward to the supermarket to be stored there, partly because of the space constraint, partly because of security, but partly also because of the requirement, like in this particular unique warehouse where they have to be kept in a certain temperature for it to last longer.
We can expect some delays in shipment of certain products simply because of bottlenecks in freight, air freight or shipping. What sorts of products will be hit?
Rice, noodles, vegetables, fresh milk, any products can actually be hit. Let's say, for example, in the shutdown of the Malaysian system, some of the vegetables might come in a bit later, some of the eggs might come in a bit later, but by and large we have been able to have other sources to come in and supplement and make up for what we may have been disrupted from the Malaysia side.
Say the example of fresh vegetables. I mean, personally, I was a bit worried because what if I couldn't get my leafy vegetables? So at that point, was it not sufficient for the government to say, let's ramp up the production of local vegetables now?
We are realistic that even as we ramp up the local production, we will not be able to provide 100% of the fibre needs for Singaporeans. So instead of just depending on ramping up local production, we have actually opened up many new supply lines from further away countries. We have also brought in frozen and canned options in order to make sure that the dietary requirements of the fellow Singaporeans are met. We may have to make some adjustments. We may have to pay slightly more as we diversify. But if we all come together as one people to share what we have, I'm quite confident that we will have enough for ourselves.
After speaking to the minister, I'm not just reassured by the fact that we have physical stockpiles of food all over the country, but also that we have a team of dedicated Singaporeans working hard to make sure that there's a constant food supply reaching our supermarkets and markets. Now, I've also learned that at some point, we may have to make certain adjustments, such as turning to frozen and canned food. Now, I wonder if those are just as nutritious. Only one way to find out. I've arranged to meet Jacqueline Roytons, a dietitian and nutritionist. She's going to show me how fresh food stacks up against food that can be kept in storage for months and even years. Okay, so we have in front of us the fresh as well as the frozen or canned versions of some produce. Jacqueline, can you please compare their nutritional value? Let's start with the chicken.
So here we have the fresh chicken, here we have the frozen chicken. Diana, there's not much nutritional difference between these two.
Wow.
The amount of protein, zinc, vitamin Bs are almost similar.
What if I bought a lot of fresh chicken and I freeze it myself? Is there a difference?
There's a big difference because when you freeze it at home, it's not undergoing an industrial process called flash freezing that you would get when you've gotten this frozen chicken.
Why does the technology make a difference?
Because flash freezing involves quickly cooling food down using a temperature of minus 200 degrees in a very short amount of time, which you will not be able to achieve in your home refrigerator.
I see. So it's industrial sort of freezing, and that sort of keeps the nutrients of the bird when it was slaughtered fresh, and that is something that we can't do at home.
That's correct.
Let's move on to broccoli. What's the difference between fresh and frozen?
So when you eat a frozen broccoli, you do lose a little bit of vitamin C, and that's just because, in the process of freezing this, it gets blanched for a couple of minutes just for the preservation process. So that's when the vitamin C gets leached into the water. But apart from that, everything else stays the same.
How significant is this loss of nutrient during the blanching process?
It is not so significant at all.
Does that mean that if I have to rely on frozen vegetables for an extended period of time, I will be fine?
You'll be fine because there's things like frozen carrots, peas and corn, which also contain vitamin C. So that's perfectly okay.
Okay, now let's move on to the mushrooms, the fresh shiitake as well as this canned version. What's the difference?
So the canned version, so usually in a canning process, they normally add some preservatives to it. It can be sugar, it can be salt. In this case, it's going to be salt. So if you look at the ingredient list here, it says that there is shiitake, there's water, and then there's salt. So this salt creates a very high sodium content in this versus this, because this looks like it's just been vacuum packed, nothing seems to be added to it. So in this can, you probably lose some vitamin B as well because it's a water-soluble vitamin. And so what I recommend is if you were to eat canned mushrooms, throw away the water and wash the mushrooms a little bit more. Maybe you want to soak it for 5-10 minutes to remove the excess sodium, and then it's good to go.
With everything that we've been told about the spread of the virus globally, it's hard not to be frightened. And when we are frightened, we panic buy. It's the only thing we have control over. 谢谢. But if there is one way to manage that fear, is to buy only what we need. Because as I've learned, panic buy not only puts a further strain on our supplies, it can also drive up prices.